All right, well, thanks all for showing up towards the end of the semester. I really appreciate it. And today, as part of Architecture Forum, which is half art history, half architecture, we are going to welcome Professor Roberto Fabbri. Is that right?
Very well.
Okay, who comes to us all the way from Zayed University in Abu Dhabi, but by way of Boston, where he is the 2024 Aga Khan Program for Islamic Architecture Fellow at MIT. His research interest focuses on urban development, architecture, and heritage in the Gulf cities, and also around this notion of narrative space. He co-authored Modern Architecture Kuwait 4989 in 2016, and Urban Modernity in the Contemporary Gulf 2021, and Impatient Cities of the Gulf in 2022. And today he's going to talk to us about a forthcoming sort of project in the works. So you're hearing it now first.
Yeah, it's pretty new what I'm sharing with you today. The project is not new. I've started working on Zayed Island since I moved to Abu Dhabi a few years ago, building on some other ideas that I was cooking. But I had the chance to put the pieces together only this semester. Oh, I should start by saying thank you for having me here. Thank you guys for coming. And thanks for the introduction. And so this work in progress came together this semester because I finally had the time to go through my notes and connect all the dots. For once and for a different approach to research, I decided to work on something that is contemporary, and so the kind of sources that I'm finding are way different. So I'm learning during the process, and it's something that is in my backyard. So I go there every other week, and I try to become a better photographer and snapping better pictures. To try to map the transformation of this city. So I'll try to, because it's new, I need to read a little bit, and I'll try to make it less boring as possible, so bear with me. So this work explores Abu Dhabi's ongoing urban transformation as a cultural project. It focuses on Zayed Island's cultural plan in relationship with the country's strategic vision for a future post-oil economy. In early 2000s, Zayed offered an investment opportunity for upscale residential land and a touristic attraction anchored by renowned museum architecture. At this stage, the curatorial programs existed more as an intention than a fully realized concept. So architects were tasked with translating these intentions into tangible forms, imbuing semantic meanings into architectural shapes. Architecture emerged as a chosen language evoking an idealized past in response to a fluid context that constantly adjusts along the East-West and tradition-modernity axis. Hence, nomadic narratives were revitalized and architects were mobilized. The Gulf, with its waterways, shares a long history of importing materials, technology, and expertise, sometimes even entire buildings. Therefore, many scholarly works build upon the notion of mobility, transnationalism, and transfer. While this work try to explore the idea of transplant, suggesting that despite their foreign origins, architectural elements somehow retake roots in the new context, establishing new relationships and acquiring new meanings. So in doing so, the research challenges the notion of context. It questions the idea of tabula rasa, often associated with the Gulf cities transformation, and instead studies how there are always pre-existing conditions that architects and clients can either utilize or deliberately ignore. This work not only seeks to analyze why this process occurs, but also aims to understand how it unfolds, and often from a designer perspective. It reflects on how the Sadiat project has evolved beyond shaping a new urban fabric, now defining the city brandscape and contributing to the state and societal identities in a country characterized by articulated and unbalanced demographics. All right, so back in 1974, boxing legend and civil rights activist Muhammad Ali visited the newly established UAE. So archival snapshots capture him being accompanied by a local delegation to a flat island off the Abu Dhabi coast, where a few greenhouses experiment with the University of Arizona with hydroponic cultivation amid the dunes. So leap forward 5 decades and a whirlwind of master plans and architectural concepts. These very sands are transforming into one of the world's largest cultural district and real estate venture. In fact, in 2006, the Abu Dhabi Tourism Authority commissioned Gensler to draft the first strategic master plan for Sadiat Island. The island was a vast underdeveloped territory facing the northwest edge of the capital center, offered an appealing solution to the city's rapid growth, only a few new bridges away from the administrative center. So for those who are not familiar with the geography there, so Abu Dhabi is basically a system of islands in a sort of lagoon environment. The administrative center I was referring to is in this area, and this is the main, what is called the Abu Dhabi Island. This is the industrial area. This is where all the new development for residential park is happening. This is Masdar City, you might have heard of, the new airport. This is Yas Island, where all the attractions are, the F1 circuit, the Ferrari World, the Warner Village, and the golf club for I don't know what international circuit happens there. And of course the red one is Sadiat Island that is connected through a new road that goes from this side and a bridge that it comes from the other side. Dubai is in this direction, Saudi Arabia is in the other direction, and Alain and Oman is in the bottom right corner. Okay, so the operation was meant to boost the capital's upmarket tourism and offer 100 billion dirham investment opportunity in real estate, hospitality, and leisure. Gensler, a global architecture and planning firm operating in more than 50 locations worldwide, responded to the client's ambition with a plan for a new resort community which would be home to 150,000 people and a full range of hotels and attractions. So this island is it's about 24 square kilometers, which I don't know in miles, but I remember doing this association. It's as big as Cambridge and Somerville together, so it's quite a big piece of land. The whole investment plan promoted a rather touristic and residential vocation, and the strategy culminated with an extensive cultural district proposal to establish Abu Dhabi as a prominent regional and international destination. During the project press release in 2007, the the chairman, Sheikh Sultan Al Nahyan, elucidated the economic states of the project by saying that, quote, in all the studies that we have undertaken, culture has been shown to be the strong driver of the kind of tourism Abu Dhabi has identified as its primary market, upscale and high repeat visitation, unquote. The cultural district was meant to be the trigger of Saadiyat Plan, a cultural epicenter designed by a prestigious international architectural studio, charged with producing signature buildings and worldwide recognizable icons that you probably are all familiar with. The Phaidon Atlas for 21st century architecture refers to this project as the 21st century architectural Mecca, and other publications are equally generous with superlatives. There were supposed to be 4 museums of international caliber on the island, 1 extensive performing arts center, and a number of art pavilions threaded around an artificial canal that is being cancelled. In addition to that, New York University campus, I think Yale also was in the picture at a certain point. It's true, you confirm.
It was, yes. Long gossip for that one.
Yeah, and other educational facilities for high school, etc. Gensler initially suggested having all the anchor buildings protruding from the coastal line on man-made circular platforms facing the mainland, a parade of sculptural objects on pedestals. So the idea was presented in highly figurative terms. The sequence would resemble a string of pearls on the coastline. And if you know about the region, pearls are a clear, direct reference to the maritime heritage and the most traditional value of the past, and basically a reference to the pre-oil life. And similar figurative images or imagery is at the foundation of the concept, for example, for the Performing Arts Center by Zaha Hadid. The architect itself described the new creation as shaped to resemble an encrusted oyster protruding from the land into the sea, with the fluid distinctive forms of her latest works. So I'd argue elsewhere that in Gulf architecture, the persistent recourse to direct or indirect metaphorical reference to the past is meant to create a contextual linkage, aiming to justify its edification. Given the many foreign inputs in the design and in the construction process, the visual reference to symbolic past tries to make them more acceptable in terms of locality and cultural specificity to the region. Okay, this was supposed to be a video, but it's not collaborating. Anyway, so the whole Saadiyat initial vision was deeply affected by the 2008 financial crisis. So many architectural projects were delayed and several were cancelled. The architectural development substantially slowed down due to the budget restriction. And the plan initially envisioned a string of 10 coastal pearls, but in the post-2008 version, and this is one of the versions, probably the one developed by SOM, but they are different, and they keep producing new versions of the master plan. So the layout was radically changed and the number was considerably reduced. Out of all these pearls, you probably know that the only one that's being completed is Chan Nouvel Louvre Abu Dhabi that was inaugurated in 2018 and is currently still open. But there are other buildings. this is the UAE pavilion at the 2010 World Fair in Shanghai by Foster and Partners that was completely dismantled, shipped across the ocean and rebuilt on the island to host the Berkeley School of Music, which is also operative on the island. The Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is currently under construction and is scheduled for the 2025. This picture was taken in November 23, so a few months ago. So that's the state of construction. I have a reasonable doubt that in 2025 will be that's me being pessimistic. And similar for Sheikh Zayed National Museum, which seems to be more advanced in terms of construction, and they probably are pushing to have it really more or before the other one. And it's also scheduled for 2025. You've been visiting here. This is NYU Abu Dhabi. Project was by the New York architect Rafael Vignoli and is fully operational since 2014, but the area around it, it's yet to be developed and is not, they are still working on the infrastructure around. It's not going to happen soon. New projects were added and were not in the initial plan. And they are currently under construction. One is Meccano Natural History Museum, and the other one is Team Labs Phenomena, which is like a giant laser projection show. That they are also scheduled for 2025. Yeah. So I haven't developed this part yet, but I'm still working on that, and I find quite interesting to see how this remarkable cultural effort and museum is in parallel directly reflected by the real estate market, which is the real financial engine of the whole operation. So at the present time, these are posts and websites and tweets about from real estate agents. They are selling very successfully, apparently, off-plan views on the museum. So they're normally in other situations they would sell sea views or mangrove views, etc. In this case, it's like buying your new flat that is facing the Louvre or facing the museum. I don't know where I'm going with this part, but I want to dig more and see what are the real estate plans for that, which is the most difficult one because they don't share information. They want to tenders without having any surprise. But let's go back to the museums. There was supposed to be one more pearl on the island, and this is a Japanese pearl for a change. It's from Tadao Ando Architect and Associate. It was initially commissioned with a concept design for the Maritime Museum. The design phase for the museum was completed like all the other museums in early 2007. And unfortunately, together with the Performing Arts Center, was one of the first that were phased out from the project, or all. It's still yet to be seen, but the plot is being assigned to the Team Lab Phenomena, so it's not going to happen there. Even though the Maritime Museum remained as a concept stage, the project is indicative of how the architect interpreted the specific cultural context and the state narrative and the client's need. So I decided to analyze this project. Let's go back to 2007 at the launch of the whole operation that at this point is run by the TDCIC, Tourism Development Cultural Investment, which is a state-led agency that are in charge of all the museums. They launched the program with the inauguration of this exhibition on the 31st of January 2007 at the Emirate Palace. From what we can see from the photos and the pamphlet of the venue, there are on display the general master plan, the cultural vision, the architectural project at the concept stage of all the major buildings, including the Maritime Museum, which is in the bottom right corner. So the project were presented with written design intentions, sketches, mass models, and digital renders defining the building forms. From what we can see, the exhibition content suggests that in these early stages, architects were given general narratives and guidelines, but the museum content, the curatorial part, was yet to be developed. In fact, on the following day of the launch, so the 1st of February, Canadian International Museum Planner and Consultant Lord Cultural Resources announced in an official dispatch to have been charged with the development of the content and operational matter for Sheikh Zayed Museum and for the Maritime. So it was not available before while the Tadand was developing the project. So we can assume that known or little curatorial direction posed a significant challenge in defining how intangible heritage could shape the museum and its galleries. And in Andrew McClellan's words, how will a known material cultural heritage translate into the space of the museum? In this case, the answer is a sculptural allegory and a reference to the nomadic culture at the architectural scale. And or a finite form that by its shapes appears contextually coherent and resonate with the suggested narrative of the Maritime Museum. So the building was originally planned to encompass a 100-meter-long reflective prism dramatically emerging from the sea and carved diagonally from the lower part. The sizable triangular void resembled in the negative space a jib sail inflated by the wind. The museum was designed as a system of symbols to communicate the complexity of the central exhibition theme that at the time was not yet developed. In Ando's work, the museum's suspended volume can also be read as a bridge meant to create a meeting point between water and land, symbolizing the duality of two antithetical but reciprocal souls of the collegiate culture, of the desert nomadic and the maritime life. Let's change continent for a second. At the same time as Abu Dhabi's project, Ando was also considering a commission in Monterrey, northern Mexico. A new educational building for University of Monterrey, which is spelled UDEM, and the UDEM campus was in expansion at that time. The new master plan destined a new acquired 14 hectares of land to the creation of the Centro Roberto Sala, which is a new structure specifically built for art, architecture, and design school. The UDEM campus is in the city's west end on a very steep terrain found between three mountain crests, the Sierra Madre, Las Militras, and the Huasteca Canyon, which is in the bottom right corner. The vertical rocky landscape provides a theatrical backdrop that Ando captured in the initial sketches in what he calls an emaki, which is basically a visual diary of the project that is still conserved in the UDEM archive, and I managed to snap a picture here. So for this project, he designed the center as a 99-meter-long concrete box, only 1 meter shorter than the Dogo Jenga in Abu Dhabi. The volume was also carved from the bottom lower part, leaving the mass suspended on two small supports at the extremities, creating a vast covered square underneath it. The concrete skin of the building merges with the gray tones of the limestone from the surrounding landscape. It looks like a giant monolith eroded by winds, not dissimilar from the Huasteca Canyon in the proximity. The architect identified the void as the most crucial moment of the building. He investigated a sequence of different geometrical variations until he defined a shell geometry generated by two hyperbolic paraboloids, notching the mass from opposite corners. Okay, although several aspects are radically different, the building shape has an unquestionable visual affinity with the Maritime Museum in Abu Dhabi. There could be considered perhaps variation on a similar geometrical theme. The analysis of the archival material of the two projects reveal a series of different three-dimensional studies for the parabolic volumes abstracted by each building. Perhaps this results from practical consideration of the different functions hosted inside. Most probably, it also represents the designer's sensibility to the context. The Mexican version is more acute in its angles and looks closer to the extruded sedimentation in the neighboring geology. The Emirati version is a rounder arch, soft and suspended like a textile in the wind. For the same visual intention, the volume is slightly skewed on the vertical axis, which enhances the sense of fluctuation of the mass over the water court, just like a ship. Finally, the primary material sets the two buildings very far apart. Smooth-faced concrete blocks are the signature element for all the Andes prominent buildings and the material selected for the northern Mexican context. An unspecified reflective cladding was meant to be explored for the maritime environment in Abu Dhabi. This cladding would have completed the natural reflection of the water court over which the building would have floated. And the reflection would also have completed the void rounds arch into a circle, or from this perspective, probably like an American football. So, in conclusion, the Maritime Museum and the Centro Roberto Garzazada were underdeveloped during the same years, and Ando, in his monography, categorized these works under the label void spaces, a series of cases where he explored the subtractive operation on solid masses, such as the National Art Center in Tokyo or the Polygram Theater in Shanghai. The Abu Dhabi project was cancelled and never developed in details, but the Centro Roberto Garzazada was completed in 2014, has been my office for 5 years, and is still in use in campus. His physical presence helps to imagine how the Maritime Museum could have been. It also offers an interesting comparison of the two buildings' symbolic meaning transition during this apparent architectural transplant. In Abu Dhabi, the negative space symbolized the sail, the tent, a getaway to the sea, and a meeting point between the nomadic and the maritime life. In Monterrey, the void is the gate of creation, alluding to the Japanese torii, a traditional arch that marks the accent to a Shintoist temple, suggesting the student's portal to a new temple of creation. This is Ando explaining. As the context changed, so did the symbol, and the metaphorical meaning of the building's shape. Metaphorically again, it seems that the Japanese architect, while exploring symbols of a nomadic culture, ended up creating a nomadic architecture, capable of recontextualizing itself from the flat desert and maritime land of the Gulf to the mountainous landscape of northern Mexico, by coherently assuming different materiality and meaning. And thank you.
So we can take some questions, general discussion. I might go ahead and start by asking you if you think that this kind of like monumental concrete block kind of architecture that we see is like supposed to be some sort of sense of geology or like fossilization or deep time that can allow it to signify a past for anywhere. Like how exactly does it become so nomadic? Is it because of the fact that it's this like concrete sort of emptiness? And how do you see that happening? I know that you've discussed some other works in the Gulf which are like very obviously representative. Like you have the ones that's okay, that's an eagle, that's a desert rose, like we get it. But then these like larger sort of more plain concrete blocks are a little less obvious, I think, but still trying to do something similar. I don't know what you think about that.
I'm still working on this. This is the question that is across all the recent speculation that I'm doing. I think we exhausted the direct metaphor. I mean, we had all the eagles we need and all the dolphins and all the pearls and all the oyster. Probably, at least at this level of architecture, probably, perhaps at second, third level of construction still use this metaphor. For example, I don't know if you managed to go to buy a new central library. That is,
oh yes, it's a big book.
It's a big book. So and it looks like one, and there's no. So I think we exhaust this part, and people are trying to build different type of analogies. That of course different architects respond in different ways, and not everyone has the quality of these two buildings, and or the capacity to sell the narrative to the client together with the building, but I guess what I'm trying to do with this and understanding what's the notion of context nowadays, and I'm using Abu Dhabi as a case study, a big case study, because a lot of international superstars are operating there, and it's easier to analyze their projects. They're well published, so they are more reachable. So what notion of context do we have to use as a designer, architects nowadays, if we are operating in the Northwest, or whatever the Northwest means? So everybody has a different recipe. I think it's about time to stop thinking of the tabula rasa approach and what Remco has brought in the last 20 years, where we can do any sort of shape, because the shape is independent from the context, and we probably need, I'm not Remco, so I can give a new direction for contemporary architecture. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to understand how this building radicate into the ground and what kind of relationship are establishing or not establishing with the context. And I'm also at the moment fascinated by this mobility that we always interpret in terms of exchanges of knowledge or people, but rarely of buildings. They are coming from the other part of the world, and they kind of they are dropped there. But I mean, this is an example of two similar buildings that somehow they are an answer to the local context in different ways. please answer more or less your question.
Thank you for the talk, very fascinating. I just want to go back to the Saadiyat Island, and I'm very curious to hear your opinion on its relationship to Abu Dhabi at a much larger scale. So I think, in my opinion, you can't really look at it and kind of, yeah. So, like you mentioned, Saadiyat is right next to the mainland, and then there's also the Maria Island and the Reem Island. And I'm very curious to hear your opinion about how connected Saadiyat is to those islands, and or does it exist in vacuum, and its relationship to what I would consider as the more populated parts of Abu Dhabi, which is like the main island. And even looking at it in terms of like urban planning, Abu Dhabi was like built on a grid, right? I think that's what sets it apart from other cities in the UAE. And it does seem to me that the urban design of the island seems to disregard its connection to other parts of Abu Dhabi. Yeah, like right here, right. And yeah, I'm just interested to hear what you think.
Okay, thank you for your question. There's Abu Dhabi is expanding in different directions, and I didn't want to bring also urban analysis to this talk. There's a planning that is at the moment dividing the city by sectors, and the sector is like who are supposed to go living in that area. Supposed to. I mean, it's not mandatory. Everybody can buy a house if it has enough resources. Saadiyat is open to even foreigners can buy a house there. Abu Dhabi Island cannot. Only locals can buy on Abu Dhabi Island. The locals are also, because of the system of what we would call like social housing, they have free plots to build their own houses. And these houses are in the southern part of Ghana, basically in the desert part. So we are assuming that local population is growing, they are growing, and they are going to live in the southern quarters of the city. The islands you were referring to, which are Reem and Maria, and I'm trying to point them out for all the other, which are here, are in between the mainland and Saadiyat, and they are also under development. Saadiyat is high-end. They're mostly building villas or apartments. They are quite expensive. Reem is halfway. It's like middle class for expats, mostly. There are no villas in Reem Island, and so probably Emiratis families are not living there. Young generation are more used to apartments, but traditional families will never go there. It's a process. It's hard to say what will be in 20 years, but as I was saying you before, there's 150,000 people that are supposed to live on the island. I don't have the numbers for Mariam Island and Reem Island, but they are quite dense. So there will be a lot of people living in that area. At the moment, yes, it exists in a sort of vacuum. I don't know if I have a recent plan for, perhaps, let me see if I have, yeah, that's the island. I don't have a bigger plan for that, but this one in the center is the Marina district. This one, I mean, it will have a skyscraper and all high density and high, I mean, congested area. So at the moment it's a desert. The first picture I show you, the one that Abu Dhabi campus is, NYU Abu Dhabi campus is, it's the same area. So it's happening. When it will be completed, I have no idea. I don't think they have an idea, but it's one of the expansion that the municipality is using, and because of the museum and the cultural district, there are other ministries that are involved in that. What would be the Ministry of Culture and Youth, for example. It's a vacuum for the time being, but they are proceeding in a quickly. They have a pace, and they are attracting a lot of capitals. And as far as I can tell, they are keep assigning new plots, and when I drive the main road, I can see that the new plots are assigned. And sometimes I hear that they do launch the tender for the international bidders, and so it's happening.
Thank you.
I don't know if this-
Yeah, I was wondering what local architecture and art historians or critics think about like this internalization of architecture, where we bring all these star architects to the region. And this would be my personal view. To be honest, they do kind of the biggest version of Arabic culture,
Yeah.
which they take the most superficial understanding of Arab culture, and then just project it on whatever surface they want to design. And why there's not a shift into more like there are Arabic star architects. I think, for example, about like my personal favorite is just like Kamaj. How as he is from Jordan, he has of course Jordan is not the Gulf states, but I guess like we have even one who is like here educated in the Emirati. Like you nowadays have a solid base of architects and a solid cultural fabric, I would say, in this region. Why people not nowadays that this tabula rasa, as you said, concept of the Emirati is gone. Why they're not now building on their own resources? Because for architects, it's okay, Frank Gehry. Most normal people don't even know who that is. So I think it's more about the effect than the name. And for example, Kamaj did in Ashkelon this beautiful building on a stone quarry where people would literally just visit for this experience. Mm-hmm. And there you have a fundamental understanding of our Arabic culture. This Arabic culture also doesn't exist. I mean, like in this context, Jordanian culture. So, also, it was more less of a question and more of a statement, I guess. But I mean, like, why people are not like.
I understand where your comment is coming from. I don't think it's a matter of passport here, or the color of the passport of the architect that is invited. And I would say that there are a few firms around the world that will be able to be charged with a project like that. Louvre Abu Dhabi cannot be given to a recently graduated student from the US, even if it's talented or anything like that, because it's a building that only 5 firms in the world can develop or has the capacity to do so. Same for the other. The Guggenheim goes with Gehry because the Guggenheim always went with Gehry, so they are 2 franchises going together. The Louvre, one of the French architects, probably that's also the reason why the Jean-Noël was invited. Also, you need firms that have a portfolio of projects of the same size, museums, cultural buildings. So that makes the selection very, very narrow. So if you look at who's building museum around the world, of that size are the usual 10 suspects, right? That is because it's a party for very few people invited, but also because these firms are developed the curriculum to participate in these things. Sheikh Zayed National Museum, when it was assigned through a competition. Some Arab architects were invited to the competition. They were not selected for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of unspoken myth around that competition, but at that time it seems that the NAVNA, the British Museum, was participating as a cultural partner with enterprises, so that probably pushed towards a British architect. Could be or not. I mean, this is me speculating, and I don't know why Tadawando is in the picture, or why they decided to have it out, but they probably went for big names. In the regions, there are good local firms that grew up, even young local firms that grew up to the point that they can start working internationally, but they are not still yet at this level to compete at this. This is like an F1 of architecture. They're probably still in F2 or F3. But it's coming. And they are ex-architects from the UAE. They're doing good projects around. They are from Kuwait, what's the name, AGI. They're start getting some bigger projects in Expo 2020, for example. So you start seeing that. It's an architectural scene that it's growing, but these operations are international venture capitals that will never assign these projects to somebody who doesn't have that curriculum. But I'm sure when you graduate, there will be.
I think it's also important to note that even though many of them are like international companies, but they do have branches in the UAE, and they do work on those projects, and many of those architects are actually local to the region. Like for example, the Grove, which is like between Louvre Museum and NYU. Callis and Artikel worked on it, but the lead architects who were actually developing the project were from the UAE. So there is this kind of hierarchy, but obviously there are like local architects involved in many of the projects.
There's and I don't want to do politics here, but there's always this necessity to find the locality into the local to justify the building, which I think it's a bit, I don't know, it maybe makes some people sleep better, but it's not the way architecture works. No? So that's a typical case is in here, in the middle of the Abu Dhabi island, and it's called the Cultural Foundation. The Cultural Foundation was built in 1976 or something like that, when Sheikh Zayed was live, and the firm was TAC from Cambridge, Massachusetts, right? So TAC, international global firm, founded by Gropius in the 50s, had buildings all over the Gulf. And they've been building a lot in that time. So at a certain point, somebody in Abu Dhabi municipality find that one of the person that was working there was an Iraqi architect. And all of a sudden, they start publishing that this guy was the author of the building. And this person went on and had a career, but at that time was in between a master's degree in Harvard, I guess, and another planning program, I don't remember what, in US, and it was definitely not a job captain in TAC. but because of the necessity of finding the local in local construction, they push his name forward. And at a certain point, even in the commission that I'm in for the preservation of this building, the report was all about this guy. And I don't understand. I don't understand why it is so important. And this example is TAC is the architect collaborative. So they are erasing names from their own firm. There's no Macmillan, there's no, it's called the architect collaboratives. But between a collaborative or architect, we want to find out this one Iraqi that worked for a year on that project in a team of probably to justify. I don't want to see that it's like, you know, doing falcon feather or but it's the same attitude, and I'm still trying to understand why it's so important. I don't know. I don't want to do polemics on that, right? But I'm always surprised. Sorry.
No, because like then I think about like you were talking about that all these Soviet architects were brought into the Gulf region.
Oh yeah, like during the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. And they create this really Soviet-driven architecture in the region, which then becomes local recognized architecture, right? And there's the whole heritage preservation now to freeze these buildings as they were. And then for me, it's like, okay, if we go international, just let it look international, and then in 40 years we will say, okay, this was like the capitalist enterprise of the Gulf states, and these are like the things. For me, it almost becomes as like a Palestinian. For me, it's almost insulting, to be honest. Sometimes seeing like these pathetic tries to play something Arabic, and it's such a form of Orientalism. Where I'm like, you can give me a like glassy skyscraper, and don't tell me afterwards it's like a desert rose or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, technically, the modernist architecture you're referring to, at this point, that's considered part of the culture of the UAE. Like all the Soviet architecture was imported. The brutalist architecture, especially in the mainland Abu Dhabi, it holds such a special place in the collective memory of the residents in Abu Dhabi. And at this point, even though it was imported from overseas, it's part of the, I would say, vernacular. Like, yeah.
Yeah, that is a good example. I mean, and I'm sure you were referring to Stanek book, right? So the Bulgar Consult building that are in Abu Dhabi, but there are plenty from Polish architect in the Gulf, and they became part of the urban fabric. So now they are as local as, it doesn't matter what color the passport of the initial designer is. Now the bus station that you probably visit, the green building, everybody wants to keep it, and it's part of the, and I'm sure you also consider that as an Abu Dhabian part of your heritage, right? So why?
The big question I want to ask, I don't want to stand between you and the pizza though. So maybe we want to have pizza first. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, we can keep talking.
Keep talking
And
Yeah, so the big elephant in the room, and literally right in the middle of Saadiyat, where you took your picture of the Foster Museum, the Zayed Museum, is the Abrahamic house, that massive building of concrete. But it's interesting to me that you didn't show it. I mean, it's not a museum, but it sort of is the big.
Is it this one?
Yeah, out there. So, I mean, that's a massive project. And I was just thinking how, I mean, it sort of backbenched these other projects in some sense. They sort of like came out very fast and very quick and at a scale that none of these others were. And of course, it's also a very historical moment, right? That it was defining. And I know that Ajay is now persona non grata, so maybe we're erasing him off also. But he had a wonderful view of it.
It came out before.
It came out before the scandal.
I haven't talked much about this project because, as I was saying with him, I really have issues with this. Apart from political implications that I don't want to bring here, but as an architectural project is very weak in my opinion. It has of course a room on the island and is part of but it came out of the blue. It was not an initial plan. All of a sudden they had this signature with the Pope and some other authority, and they decided to do that. We what at the beginning thought or seemed to be a quite, good idea in terms of international. And that it was kind of like translating how the government was moving in the local political scenarios. Now it's completely upside down. Now it's completely different. So I don't know how to look at these. I will have to mention it at a certain point in my chapters, but I don't know what to make of that. I will probably even try to wait for all these pieces, because at the moment the island are like they are patches, and there are patches in between that are not developed. So what is going to happen in between? So maybe that one will become an open, square plaza kind of thing where people can go around, sit and look at the rest of the buildings from an elevated point of view. It will be part of the landscape with these sunken. But at the moment, it's quite isolated. It's functioning, and there are services basically every day. But
There's no shade though.
Yeah.
So I think the dream of like, oh, we're gonna hang out in the courtyard is like, not unless you want to get roasted. Like,
Yeah, but it is, I mean, to your point, if it's not a desert rose, it's not, it does do the same kind of funny Orientalism, arches for the mosque, and but on the other hand,
everybody loves it. The mosque is so beautiful. It's like, is there any more cheesy way to do? To do the obvious. The control of the light also is something that I don't understand. It's always in your face. The mosque is probably the only one that filters the light, but all the other two are. There's no control of light and the space. Religious space is all about that. So when you have big glass between all the sun, even if they are behind these, let's call it porch for the sake of a better word, but there's a lot of light coming in, and it doesn't really. You wrote about that. You might have different opinion.
the thing is the scale is so huge that it'll never get green. It'll never fill in.
Yeah.
It'll never really be at a human scale. It's very hard to imagine.
I'm still working on this.
What do you think of it?
Yeah.
No, I don't like it.
Because I have nobody like, okay, we want to make sure we're not offending anyone.
But I guess the concept about waiting to see how the urban fabric around it develops is really important, because mosques are really important part of the urban fabric. They're not just spaces of prayer, they're spaces of community. People gather by mosques, and they're in a way they're not meant to be monuments, right? They're not meant to be isolated monuments. They're meant to be integrated within the communities, whatever it is. At least that's the way I see it.
It was very funny because this was the only mosque I've ever been in where we weren't allowed to sit on the ground. Remember? We had this huge issue where the guard wanted us to keep moving. Like, they wouldn't let you just sit in peace, like in a mosque. Anywhere in the world, you can sit and meditate or just have time. And we were like, no, you're not allowed to sit here.
There was consideration of that going in the review, and it was taken out of concern about the guard. Because it could be pinned on the one card, but it wasn't his fault.
Wasn't him
He had
at all.
been told to tell people that.
Yeah. No, it wasn't him at all. It was, part of it was, in retrospect, it was really a mixed message. That it wasn't really thought of as a mosque, it was seen as a tourist attraction. So if you go into a museum and tourists start sitting on the ground, someone might get upset. And that's what that guard was coming with, the mentality that these are outsiders, they're tourists. Why are they sitting on the ground?
It's open 5 days a week from 9 to 5 for tours. So
Yeah, exactly.
that's the majority of the
And also, to get from one part to another, you have to cross the parking lot.
yes, you do.
That's
Underground.
very.
Metaphor.
Yeah, I mean that says a lot about the golf, but at the same time, it's kind of like break the.
It's an unresolved element that really messes it up.
There's so many issues with these projects. It's really, and it's been a competition with other because they are like I find some other proposals for that.
A couple.
Yeah, a couple, which are even more complicated. Which is, so I think they went for the safety.
But then we go back to you saying, okay, there has to be architects with certain portfolios and with certain, let's say, credibilities.
Yeah.
And how I remember, like I was really young when I went to Dubai, and so many of these things are non-functional. They are like very functional. It's an image that you want to portray.
Right.
And I would say there, you maybe don't want an architect with this kind of portfolio because they're used to produce images, which not function then in an urban scale. So you have kind of, I would say, how Roman urbanism functioned, right? One monument sitting next to the other, and then like some weird garbage space in between. That you then only when you go one path, you will have a beautiful experience, and everything else will be like a really awkward junk space. So I think like architects who work on the residential space or really just maybe do smaller scale things, they have to interact with these kind of smaller scale urbanism.
The life has to be injected in these elements. I mean, the city should become a city and start, connecting the pieces. At the moment, it's leapfrog urbanism. You got piece here, piece here, piece here. And if they will not over control that area, which I'm not sure, but if they will leave some life get into these places, then probably might have a more normal relationship between buildings. At the beginning, it was supposed to be one big platform that people could walk from one side to another, which is not common for all these cities. Now, some highways started cutting through these supposedly open fabric that we're building, but they're saying that they can. I spoke with one of the person that is behind the infrastructure of this project in the cultural district, and they were saying like if you cut the traffic, the car traffic, you can still feed the museum through underground tunnels. So if you want to have like one day manifestation where people are in the streets and manifestation in terms of like fireworks or something like that, the museum can still function because they have a network of underground tunnels that can. So in theory, the whole upper part can be left to people to walk. In theory, so that will be something new. And if that happens, I'm curious to see how all these connecting paths will come up, and gardens and open areas. They are still, they are popping up now in small more residential areas. So it's a work in progress. There, what is there on the island is a work in progress. Mine is a work in progress.
No, but I don't see the problem also because like a lot of this critique goes always oriented towards like the Emirati, and it's also a very form of and kind of Western behavior towards these states. But I mean, like we can also have an example of New York, Hudson Yards. It's the same kind of development issues.
Yeah.
It has the same problem. So I was more talking about these architects create these problems because we give them a giant plot, giant money, and then they hyper control everything. And we cannot allow life go in there if we have a plot which is fundamentally not open to be adapted.
Every project is different. If somebody comes to me and says, doing a museum, I have to do a museum. I cannot say I do zoom, but I want to also get into his plot, your plot, and their plot. Now, I might have an idea to connect it, but I'm out of my depth, right? So probably here is the master plan that needs to.
So, pizza night, everyone. We can keep talking for sure. I mean, there's lots to talk about.